You never think anything like this will happen to you or to the people you know. This is one of those stories when the life of your dreams turns into your worst nightmare. Only this time, it's one that no one will wake up from. This video is intended for educational and documentary purposes. The content within this video contains themes that some individuals may consider triggering, offensive, or disturbing. The intent is not to disrespect viewers or any individual spoken about herein. Viewer discretion is advised. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, and if you've never been here before, hi, nice to meet you. I'm Kimberlea. If you like deep dives into cases like the one you're going to hear today, consider subscribing to my channel. I hope this isn't disappointing, but I won't be adding a lot of video B-roll to this video today like I usually do. I wanted to get this video out quickly because so many of you have told me you like to listen to my videos on your downtime, and a lot of you have the holiday off. Don't worry, I will be adding as many pictures as I could find of everyone in this story. Many of you have expressed in the comments that you enjoy hearing and learning about mental health related topics in my videos. I want to thank all of you who have opened up about your personal mental health struggles, as well as your triumphs from experiences you've overcome and managing your symptoms. I haven't exactly opened up about mine in a video, although I have in the responses. I'd like to briefly do that as I introduce you to our sponsor for today, Cerebral. I found out about Cerebral from a true crime creator I enjoy watching, Sherilyn Dale. She's very candid about things she's going through, and there's a lot of burnout in this industry. It's definitely happened to me, and Cerebral provides a way for you to access care counselors anytime online from the comfort of your own home. And you can do it whenever it's most convenient for you, and I know I need that because I hardly have time to leave my desk when I'm researching, writing my scripts, and filming. Cerebral is a mental health platform that provides access to online prescription medication management, counseling, as well as therapy. There have been times I've had no one to talk to. This is a very lonely job, talking into a camera that doesn't talk back. I was diagnosed with cyclothymia when I was in law school, and I resisted getting help, especially medication, which I now understand is life-changing for me because I was embarrassed. I thought people would find out and they would look down on me. The last thing I wanted was to appear weak to my classmates and my colleagues, my friends, or even my loved ones because I didn't want them to see me as broken, but that only made my symptoms worse. I wish a platform like Cerebral existed back then because of the privacy and the convenience it provides. We all live busy lives. Some of us don't get the ability to see a professional quickly. With Cerebral, in most cases, you can see a prescribing provider fast in as little as 20 minutes. You can do this with instant live visits, but there's a side note. Some plan options and live visits, as well as treatment for ADHD, bipolar, and PTSD are only available in certain states and locations. What I thought was unique about Cerebral and really drew me in was that it provides access to not only therapy, but prescriptions, all for a flat monthly rate. It's affordable with or without insurance. And Cerebral is in network for certain insurers, but it can also cost 3 times less than traditional therapy services. Privacy is the biggest thing for me. As much as mental health is becoming less stigmatized, I've had it used against me when I try to be vulnerable. With Cerebral, it's easy to start right away. You just answer the questions and choose a plan. It's up to you which membership option you choose. Cerebral offers 3 plans: medication and care counseling, medication and therapy, or just therapy. For me, what's proven to be the most effective is a combination of medication and therapy. They also have an app. It's available on Google Play and the App Store. To me, it's like having a full mental health team on call whenever, wherever. If you would like to take the next step in working on your mental health, please check the description. There's a link below that'll bring you right to the questionnaire, and you can get connected with a provider right away. Plus, your first month starts at only $30 when you use my link. Okay, thanks for listening. Let's get into the case for today. This story takes place in September 2005 in a town called Naperville. It's a western suburb, 45 minutes outside Chicago in DuPage County, Illinois. Naperville is described as very family-oriented. It's also pretty upscale. Many people relocate to this area when they raise a family due to the quality schools. There are also a lot of parks, recreation areas, and it's just great for active families. I picture people walking their dogs, having barbecues, lemonade stands, kids that are playing in the streets, just a really safe neighborhood. It's not like Chicago. There's a very low crime rate and a particularly low murder rate. There are not gangs and drive-bys in the street or violence like you see elsewhere in Illinois. The story is going to be centered around a West suburban, all-American family. And you know, I hear that so much in these cases, all-American family. And trust me, I am researching more diverse cases for sure, but it struck me. It's almost like the classic fairy tale phrase, happily ever after. So I looked it up. It really originated from the basic white heterosexual couple with American ideals, but can we really use this term the way it originated with the evolution of what an American family looks like now? You tell me. However, it's also said if you describe someone as all-American, it means that they seem to have all the typical qualities that are valued by ordinary Americans. Good looks, higher education, wealth, success, etc. So I think that definition sits better with me, and it definitely describes the Hansen family. Mary Lynn and Terrence Hansen had 2 daughters and a son. They were wealthy. They had good jobs. Terry was successful in sales, and he worked for the same company for over 30 years. Mary was a devoted wife and mother. She managed the household, spent time gardening, organizing, entertaining guests, and raising their children. They had a big, beautiful home. I actually found it. It's right here. A loving marriage and 3 beautiful children. Everyone that knew the Hansens said they were living a great life and had everything they could possibly want. I feel like stories always start out like this. Terrence Michael Hansen, who went by Terry, was born September 18th, 1948 in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And as a young man, he served in the Navy Reserve. He met Mary in high school in the 60s, and they became high school sweethearts. After high school, they got married. Terry was a hard worker. He loved to golf on his off time, and he spent a lot of time golfing with his friends. He was also a huge Vikings fan, and he enjoyed watching sports and spending time with his family. Mary Lynn Hansen, who I will refer to as Mary, was born July 14th, 1950, also in Minneapolis, Minnesota. After her and Terry got married, they wanted to start a family right away. In 1970, their first child was born. They named her Jennifer. They did stay in Minnesota for a few years, but ended up moving to various states due to Terry's job. They were living in New Jersey when they had their second daughter, Catherine, Kate. She was born August 27th, 1974 in Morristown, New Jersey. Finally, they had their third child, and this time it was a boy, Eric Hansen. He was born in Atlanta, Georgia on November 22nd, 1976, just a few days before Thanksgiving, and he was the Hansens' last child. Mary was known as the Martha Stewart of her friend group. She had an eye for fashion, design, and decorating. She was a perfectionist when it came to party planning, and she and Terry loved getting their friends together for games of bridge and cards at their house all the time. Terry and Mary were opposites as much as they were compatible. For example, during one of their regular bridge parties, Mary stepped away for just a moment and she asked Terry to watch the fish that was cooking on the grill. In only a matter of minutes, it sounds like something that would happen to me, he got carried away in a conversation, and when Mary came back and opened the grill, there was nothing there except charcoal, and they would joke about this all the time. Mary was always offering to help. She would even redecorate her friends' homes and give them beauty advice. She was one of those friends that would come over, that would bring you soup when you're sick, and then by the time she left, your whole house would be rearranged, organized, and cleaned from top to bottom. Terry was known as a charming, handsome man. He had a really great sense of humor, and he loved to tease the people closest to him. A phrase that he used a lot was, "Don't get mad, get even." This reflected his work ethic. He was hardly ever seen without a laptop or his phone. He was always working and multitasking. He could draft up contracts while he was watching the children, and he could also be on a business call at the same time. He loved his job, and he was a devoted family man. Eventually, the Hansens decided to move to Naperville, Illinois, when the children had graduated from high school. Jennifer decided to stay back in Minnesota. She ended up getting married to a man named Corey Williams, and they had 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, just like her mom. Kate and Eric moved to Illinois with Terry and Mary, and they were very attentive parents. They went above and beyond for all of their children. All 3 of them were positioned to have opportunities to get whatever they desired in life, and their parents were there to help. Kate was very close with her mother, and she took after her in a lot of ways. Kate enjoyed going shopping with her mom, decorating the house, and throwing parties for special occasions with friends and family. She was also known for her very strong political views. She attended Aurora University, graduating in 2003 with a degree in political science. She was a staunch Republican. She was a huge fan of Bill O'Reilly, and she would frequently call into his radio show. She looked up to women like Laura Bush. She even spotted her once at a restaurant while she was visiting New York and became so giddy that she shouted out loud with joy. Kate also liked expensive luxury fashion. She had a very large collection of designer purses, specifically Louis Vuitton bags. Her aunt would joke around that while they went on a trip to Paris, Kate spent way more time shopping for bags than she did enjoying the tourist attractions. While in college, she was working as a waitress at an upscale steakhouse called Sullivan's in downtown Naperville. This is where she met her future husband, James, Jimmy Sow. Jimmy was actually on a date with another woman, but Kate made such an impression on him that he slipped away from the table and asked for her phone number. He also impressed her by giving her a very generous tip. He did not hesitate. He called Kate the very next day and they went out the same night. And from that moment on, they never left each other's sides. They really felt like they were meant for one another. Jimmy came to the US from Taiwan with his brother, Kiyoshi. He was only in 6th grade at the time and he was very ambitious. He owned and operated a company called TTT Incorporated that imported and exported computer equipment between the US and Taiwan, where his parents still lived. Jimmy's brother also worked for his company. Jimmy was making money from a very young age and he never left home without carrying a lot of cash. Just like Kate, he enjoyed the finer things in life. He was into trading and investing, and he even had a collection of gold bars in his house. About 8 months after Kate and Jimmy met, they eloped in Vegas, but they kept their marriage under wraps for a while because they planned a very elaborate, fancy, huge celebration in the spring of 2000 on a boat off of Navy Pier. After they were married, they got this big, gorgeous 2-story home in a community called White Eagle. The subdivision was only 5 miles away from the Hanson's residence, and look how beautiful it is. I love the brick. It had 5 bedrooms, 3 baths, and it's over 3,000 square feet. I always try to find these locations so we can picture what it looked like, so I did find it online, and you can see what it may have looked like back when the Sows owned it. The couple enjoyed dining out, going to the movies, and spending time with Kate's family, especially Mary. Their home was in an upscale, quiet, gated community. It was immaculate. It was lined with these well-manicured lawns and fancy homes, and even boasted 24-hour security with officers on patrol. Jimmy regularly played poker with other guys in the neighborhood, and they were all very friendly, and they looked out for one another. If anyone needed anything, they were there to help. Kate and Jimmy were in love. They had the same goals. They were both family-oriented. They looked forward to starting a family of their own together. And Kate was actually helping Jimmy with his company. She was working as an administrative assistant. The family stayed close, even though they were in different states. She loved spending time with Jennifer's children. She adored her 2 nieces and nephew. When Terry and Mary moved to Naperville, they met another couple, Ron Olson and his wife, Andy, and the 4 of them really hit it off. They had a very close friendship. They considered each other family. They spoke every day. Ron also knew the Hanson children pretty well. He said that Mary and Terry would do anything for their children. Out of all the kids, Mary was the closest to Eric and Terry was the closest to Kate. Daddy's girl and mama's boy, perhaps. Mary was known to spoil Eric, and I think most parents are somewhat guilty of that, especially when it's the baby of the family. The last born is the last chance to be the best parent, and in some cases, parents will overcompensate for anything they regret doing or not doing with their previous kids. Mary doted on Eric since he was born. Eric was growing up at a time when his parents were the wealthiest they had ever been. Therefore, he did tend to get more material things that he wanted. They went on vacations, they had big Sunday night dinners with their friends, and he was gifted things like cars and nice clothes. I think you get the picture. However, Eric was a handful. They say the boys are. I have a girl, so I don't have firsthand experience. But moms that I've talked to say that boys are just naturally more rambunctious. With Terry at work all the time, it was really hard for Mary to handle all three kids, with Eric being the hardest. She just wanted Eric to be calmer like the girls were, and by the time he was only 18 months old, Mary thought there might be something wrong with him. In this next part, I will be discussing mental health, specifically ADHD, and even more specifically, ADHD in children. I'm not an expert, but I know enough about ADHD to understand it. But before this video, I had never gone deep into how it may affect children and when. And by the way, if you're not interested in this part of the video concerning mental health, you can skip ahead. I will leave the timestamp below. However, I usually don't include topics that aren't relevant to the story, so I do encourage you to listen. Mary brought Eric in to be evaluated by a physician who ended up referring her to a child psychologist. After fully evaluating Eric, it was the doctor's professional opinion that Mary tried medication with him. Keep in mind, he's not even 2 years old at this point. I'm going to present you with the facts that I've gathered, and you can make your own judgment call and opinion, and I will give you my thoughts as well. If you have ADHD, or you have a child that suffers with it, or takes meds, or was misdiagnosed, just any experience, leave it in the comments because it always leads to interesting conversations. But remember, be kind, considerate, and mature. I've heard about children taking medication at a young age, but I guess I never considered it at only 18 months or even kindergarten age. It just seems so young to me. As a matter of fact, children can develop the same mental health conditions as adults, but their symptoms may be different. And apparently there are things to look out for. I wanted to define mental health disorders in children. Generally speaking, it refers to delays in developing the age-appropriate thinking, behavior, social skills, and regulation of emotions, which can be very hard for children, and it can make it hard for them to function at school, at home, or in social situations. But here's the thing. It's hard to differentiate between a disorder versus normal childhood behavior. That's the trouble I have with this topic. Kids are changing. They're learning. They're not little adults. They can't always think for themselves. And left to their own devices, many children are just children. They're immature. They make bad decisions. Basically, they don't know the stove will burn them, so to speak. I tend to lean more toward children not learning coping skills, or even before that, knowing right from wrong, as well as the consequences of their actions, and therefore they start to exhibit this unwanted behavior, and then it turns into a habit over time, which is then harder to curb. Unbeknownst to me, before researching this thoroughly, there are actually a litany of common disorders that appear in childhood, which makes sense because they have to start at some point, right? Anxiety disorders, ADHD, autism, eating disorders, depression, mood disorders, PTSD, schizophrenia, and I'm sure that is not even close to an exhaustive list. But there are also warning signs. Persistent sadness, hurting oneself, or talking about hurting oneself, talking about death or suicide, outbursts of extreme irritability, out of control behavior that can sometimes be harmful, drastic changes in mood or changes in personality or behavior, or even their eating habits, loss of weight, difficulty sleeping, frequent headaches or stomach aches, difficulty concentrating, changes in academic performance, or just trying to avoid or miss school. Tell me this, would these apply to an 18-month-old baby? The child isn't even 2, and we always say terrible 2s. That became a thing because of the way children act at 2. Not to mention that not all children act out. So if you're comparing them to another sibling, you might think they're truly broken or suffering from a disorder, but are they? What are your thoughts? Here's the thing. Inattention, impulsivity, overactivity, they're all common in ADHD, but they're also common in the daily behaviors of most preschool-age children. Studies have shown that up to 40% of children by the age of 4 already have sufficient problems with paying attention, and you add technology to the mix, that number is probably going to go up. Nevertheless, the majority of these concerns don't last long term, although we may not know about the technology thing. Right now, anyway. Even children who have symptoms that are so severe and frequent that they warrant a diagnosis of ADHD in the preschool years, only 48% of them continue to exhibit these behaviors into adolescence. Research has concluded that most of these behaviors alone by 3 and 4-year-olds are not indicative of ADHD, especially since 50% of all preschool children have the same characteristics. But let's say a child really is suffering. And taking into account that these disorders would actually negatively affect the child, it makes sense to try proven methods to improve the quality of life, not just for the children, but for the parents. Mary took Eric to mental health professionals whose job it is to diagnose these disorders. If the professionals were saying medication was the best course of action, I'm going to assume it was. But I can tell you from personal experience working at a doctor's office, there are incentives for prescribing meds to patients, especially young ones. Some say there's a plan for pharmaceutical companies to get people hooked at a young age. That way you get a patient for life. And I'm not going to go into all that. Instead, I'm going to assume these doctors were being very diligent and correctly identifying the condition, then properly medicating. Mary did tell close friends that Eric was dealing with very serious psychological issues. And by the age of 5, until he was at least 10, he was taking several different prescription medications for ADHD. ADHD medication is considered safe and effective. The risks are small and the benefits are well documented. I would really like to know what Eric's symptoms were because ADHD is not a serious psychological issue. So was he being properly medicated and was he actually diagnosed with the right disorder? Eric's friends actually said he was a normal kid, and as he grew up, he was very popular with the ladies. He was always very well put together, impeccably dressed, with this perfect blonde hair, always styled just right. He had big, bright blue eyes and a white smile. Plus, his family was well off, so that made him very desirable. He drove nice cars. He enjoyed the expensive luxury lifestyle, but it was all on his family's dime. They didn't seem to mind it though, because he was accustomed to that lifestyle. It is all he's known for his entire life. Eric had a lot of girlfriends. He loved taking them out to 5-star restaurants, enjoying a nice bottle of wine, spoiling them with expensive gifts. People who knew Eric said he was popular, confident, and you could tell he was rich. He always had nice things. Girls were always trying to get with him, so most of his relationships didn't last very long. He just had so many girls to choose from. One of Eric's exes told friends that she had literally hit the jackpot when she landed Eric. According to her, he was super hot, taking her on lavish weekend getaway vacations, buying her whatever she wanted. He may have seemed normal, but what about committing crimes by the age of 20? Is that normal? Well, it became a normal occurrence for Eric. In 1995, he was caught breaking into homes in Oakland County, Michigan, which is just north of Detroit, and don't ask me what he was doing there. He pled guilty to a series of home invasions. Since he was a first-time offender, the court allowed him to serve his 5-month sentence in a boot camp program followed by probation upon release, instead of going to jail. Can money buy freedom? I don't know. Maybe it can just buy a more comfortable sentence. Eric finished the boot camp and then he broke the terms of his probation less than a year later in 1997. This time, the judge wasn't so lenient. He sentenced him to 18 months in prison. Do you think it's true, once a criminal, always a criminal? For Eric, he was definitely on a streak. He gets out of prison and decides to attempt to steal from a department store. The clerk chases after him and he commits aggravated battery. Eric, what are you thinking? I'm sure his parents could have afforded to buy whatever it was that he wanted instead of him trying to steal it. However, stranger things have happened. It kind of reminds me of the Winona Ryder case. Do you remember? She is the actress from Stranger Things. She plays Joyce Byers, mom to Will and Jonathan. Well, in 2001, she was convicted of shoplifting thousands of dollars worth of merchandise from a Beverly Hills Saks Fifth Avenue. I don't know why he stole things, but he pleaded guilty in 1999. This time he was sentenced to 180 days in jail and 30 months probation. He's still living at home. his parents decide, okay, let's convert the basement into somewhat of a man cave. His room is much bigger than a standard bedroom. It had anything and everything he could have possibly needed and wanted. But in order to keep living there, his parents pleaded with him to stop getting in trouble. They would even have interventions whenever Eric was acting out or lying, which seemed like he did often. Of course, Eric was annoyed by these interventions, so he would spend a lot of time traveling or living with friends. And in 2002, he was living in Phoenix, Arizona. I think he might have been going to college there because he did graduate with a 4-year degree. However, I didn't see what school he went to. While he was in Arizona, he started dating a girl named Allison Beck, and things moved very quickly. They end up getting engaged and decide to move from Phoenix back to Illinois and live with Eric's family. Allison enjoys Eric's company and liked that he bought her nice things. And as time went on, the gifts got more and more extravagant. He was spending more and more money on Allison. She did notice that he always paid with credit cards though, and I'm thinking, is this his money or his parents? And you might be wondering the same thing. Did Eric even have a job? Well, we know in 2004, Allison decided to move to California, so they end up breaking up. But they're still seeing each other pretty often and keeping in touch regularly. At this point, Terry was sick of footing all of Eric's bills. He wanted him to take responsibility and get a job. Meanwhile, Kate pulls her mom aside and tells her that she and Jimmy believe Eric had one of their missing garage door openers because money and valuables were gone from their home right after Eric had visited. As much as Kate didn't want to accuse her own brother, it's the only theory that made sense to them at the time. Kate wanted her parents to do something, and that's hard because Eric's an adult. If this happened with a stranger, they'd probably call the police. But in this case, it's family. This can cause tension between Kate, her husband, her parents, and Eric, so it's a really tough spot for her to be in. Kate and Eric weren't as close as they were before because Kate took issue with the fact that Mary babied him. She thought Eric should be a man and step up, do something with his life, and stop bleeding his parents dry. She tried having conversations with him. He would just deny it, or he would blame others, or he would just insist, okay, I'm going to change. But it didn't seem to happen. Mary would make excuses for Eric time and time again. She was always concerned with protecting the family's image. She would tell Kate, do not say anything to Terry. I will take care of it and talk to Eric. At this point, Mary was working. She was in a position at MetLife Insurance, so she had some money of her own. If Eric needed something, he didn't need to take it from anyone. She would figure it out. Mary liked to keep appearances up. She cared what neighbors thought and what friends and coworkers were going to think. She didn't want it to look like they didn't have things under control. She explained to Kate, Eric is already going through a rough time. He's trying his best, and I don't want to put more stress on him. I'm not saying Mary's doing this, and I'm not saying Eric is, but have you ever thought to yourself that people are just thinking, well, you make enough money, who cares? You can just buy another one of whatever it is you lost or that was taken. And I wonder, is that the definition of entitlement? Because I think people think that way. Because Katie wanted him to, Jimmy has a talk with Eric and he denies taking the garage door opener or that he took anything from their home. Eric felt like they looked down on him. They were placing blame on him because of his actions from the past and his bad decisions from before. But in any case, Jimmy bans Eric from the Sal residence until further notice. In April of 2005, Eric is 28 years old. He finally lands a job as a loan originator for a company called Home Loan Center, and it seems like he's enjoying it. He's making his own money now, and in just a few weeks, he's flying out to California a lot more to see Allison. He's driving a black Chevy Trailblazer. He's got these new expensive rims, and he's bragging to his sister Jennifer that he's going to write his own mortgage for a condo soon. Allison's 29. She's living out in California. She's glad Eric is doing well. And maybe that's why she wanted to see him more. He's finally getting his life together. When he visited her in May, he talked about how well things were going and that he was actually considering moving there. He told her he was doing very well at his job and that things were really turning around. So they started to plan to see each other more. At the same time, though, Eric was dating another girl. She lived locally. Her name was Christine Undesser, and I'm assuming Allison did not know this. Seems like his propensity to lie hadn't changed, or maybe it was just that it wasn't that serious with Christine, and until things happened with Allison again, he figured he'd just have someone to keep him company in Illinois. I don't know. It was the third week of September 2005. Allison and Eric had met up in Chicago for a friend's wedding that weekend. Then Allison flew back to California, and Eric made plans to meet her there the following weekend for a Neil Diamond concert that was going to be at the Staples Center in LA for his world tour on Friday night, September 30th. Mary thought that was perfect because Ron and Andy planned to take a trip with her and Terry out west along the Mississippi River to a town called Galena. The two couples planned to stay for about 4 days, and they were leaving the morning of September 29th. This town looks gorgeous. There's a lot of historical sites, there's boutiques, golf courses, and we know that Terry likes playing golf. It looks like a really fun place for a getaway. Eric made his flight reservation for the 29th at 9:30 a.m. out of Chicago Midway Airport. He gave Allison all the details. He let her know he would need to leave his house around 6:30 in the morning to get to the airport in time, so she was probably going to need to call him to make sure he was awake. Wednesday, September 28th. The night before Eric was set to leave for LA, he meets up with Christine at 7 p.m. They're at a pub in Aurora called the Fox and Hound. They were having drinks, hanging out, and they talked for a couple hours. They had planned to stay longer, but when pressed about what Eric was going to be doing that weekend, he admitted he was flying out to LA to hang out with his ex-fiancée, Allison. Oh, look, he can be honest. Christine became visibly upset. She told Eric to take her home. Eric arrived at Christine's apartment at 10 p.m. They sat in the car and talked for about 15 or 20 minutes, and then he went and headed home. He arrived and settled in somewhere around 11 p.m. He said goodnight to his dad, Terry, who was sitting in his home office, and then Eric made his way down to the basement level. At this point, Allison gets a call from Eric. It's around 11:30, and they're just discussing plans for the next day, but then she couldn't hear him very well. There was static on the line. He said his phone was dying, and he got frustrated. So he tells Allison, can you just call me back real quick? So she calls back, and at this point, Terry answered the phone at the same time. And this was back when we used to use landlines, in case this sounds confusing, but they were both on the line. Eric said, hey, Dad, I've got it. So Terry ends up hanging up. I remember those days because parents would listen in on the other end. They would pretend they hung up, and then they would try to spy on you and your boyfriend's conversation or your friend's conversation. But I could always tell they were on their line because I could hear them breathing. Eric and Allison talked for about 15 minutes, again, just going over the plans for the next day. And then Eric said goodnight. He hung up the phone. He put a movie into his DVD player and fell asleep around maybe 1:30 in the morning. When Eric woke up, he knew he had a very busy day. He wasted no time. He left the house real fast and went to a convenience store to pick up a pack of cigarettes. He came back, he took a shower, he threw the rest of his things in a bag, and he left for the airport. While he's driving, he remembered he was actually supposed to drop something off to Jimmy and Kate before the trip, and it has slipped his mind. So he decides, okay, I know they might get mad at me, but screw it. I'll just have to do it when I come back. This is when he realizes he forgot his wallet, including his driver's license. That was going to be a problem. He's already halfway to the airport at this time, so he is pissed. There was no other choice. He had to turn around, miss his flight, try to book another one once he got back home, and he knew what time he could make the next flight. As you can probably imagine, this was not ideal. No one likes when this stuff happens. He gets home, he makes sure he has everything this time. He calls up Southwest, and he gets a new flight for 11:15 a.m. It's arriving at LAX at 1:30 p.m., so he decides at this point maybe he should just go ahead and book his return flight. He got a flight leaving LA on Sunday, October 2nd at 11:15 a.m., arriving back in Chicago at 5:10 p.m., just in time for him to settle back in, get a good night's sleep before work the next day on Monday. He quickly calls Allison to tell her the bad news and the good news, and then once again heads out. This time he calls his cousin Bob while he's on his way. They have a close relationship, and he explains what happened. He asked Bob if he thinks he's going to make it on time and if he knew the best roads to take and the best place for him to park once he got to the airport. And of course, he just explained to Bob that he was frustrated. He missed his other flight. He feels really tired. He didn't go to bed till late that night. He just wants to get to the airport, get on the plane, take a little nap. So Bob tries to give him the best advice and tells him good luck, and they hang up. Yay, this time he actually makes it to the airport on time. He calls Bob back. He lets him know, I'm hopping on my flight. And just about 4 hours later, he's going to be in LA. Chicago is 2 hours ahead, so he would go back in time. He arrives at 1:30 p.m. Allison is excited to see him. She asked him how the flight was. He said it was fine. He just slept the whole time. Eric and Allison start planning their weekend together. However, something is about to throw them a curveball. That Friday morning, Ron calls Mary and Terry before their trip to check in and go over their plans, but there's no answer. That wasn't that unusual, so Ron leaves a message for Terry to call him back. When Terry didn't call back after 10 minutes, Ron did start to get a little worried that the couple may have forgotten about their plans, so he tries once more. Still no answer. An hour and a half or so had gone by, and Terry still hadn't returned Ron's calls. Ron tells his wife Andy to try Mary's cell phone. No answer. He figured they may be out doing some last-minute shopping or packing, so he let it go and he waited. Meanwhile, something else was happening that had people close to the family concerned. Jimmy's brother, Kiyoshi, saw him and Kate the evening before leaving the office around 5 p.m., but neither one of them were in the office that morning and they weren't answering his calls. He was really concerned that the couple had not shown up to work, especially Jimmy. So Kiyoshi tries calling Mary's work to find out if she knew what was going on. A coworker named Catherine Von Holton answers and says Mary had not shown up. She didn't realize that Mary had planned to take off work that day for her trip. So she starts to worry, considering Kiyoshi's worried. She calls Mary several times on her phone. No answer. Catherine then tries Terry's workplace, Ashland Distribution in Willow Springs. A coworker confirms that Terry hasn't shown up, nor had he called to say he was going to be late. Again, though, they're forgetting he was supposed to take a trip that day. They become concerned, and the coworker calls Bob, who also works at Ashland Distribution. Bob explains Terry had planned to take a trip, and then the coworker remembers, but he says Terry planned to leave after this meeting. So Bob started to think something may have happened. It wasn't typical for Terry to miss an appointment, especially a business meeting. Bob tells Terry's coworker he will head over to the Hansons to check on them. Catherine had already called Mary's daughter Jennifer. She thought maybe she knew something. Jennifer explains she tried calling her dad on his cell phone at 7:15 that morning about something she needed to repair in her home, and he never answered. Jennifer goes on to say she tried the office and Mary's cell phone, and there was no answer and no call back. She tries calling Kate. The same thing. No answer. Jennifer gets worried, so she provides Catherine with the Hansons' garage door entry code. She tells her, let yourself in, check on my parents. Then Jennifer calls Bob. Bob says he's already ready to go head over there. Catherine gets into the Hansons' home, accompanied by another coworker, Belinda Robinson. They go through the garage and into the house, and they start looking around. They didn't see anything that was out of place in their perspective. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The only thing that could be questionable was a very strong fire that was burning in the fireplace while the house was unoccupied. I do have a fireplace, and it would be quite odd to leave it burning when you leave, unless you just totally forgot. I wondered if a strong fire would indicate that it had been started recently or that it had been burning for a while. I looked up the weather for that area in September, and typically it's around 77 degrees during the day and 53 at night, which is very similar to the weather here in LA. So would you even need a fire going? I personally do like to sit by the fire and read at night, but I get cold very easily. Catherine finds a note from Eric on the kitchen counter. It reads, "Mom, Dad, see you Sunday. Have fun, and Galena." Next to the note was some cash, and there was a PS on the note that said, "This is this month's rent," since it was the end of September. Catherine finds a pen, and she also leaves a note right next to that one for Mary. Bob arrives, also looks through the entire house, sees nothing wrong except for what he described as a raging fire in the fireplace. He found it to be odd. He didn't recall the Hansons ever having a fire going when no one was home. Bob also said he wasn't used to seeing the house as clean as it was, but he knew that the family members were planning to be out of town, and they may have purposely tidied up so that when they came home, there would be an organized home for them upon their return. Bob starts to think something may have happened after Eric left that morning. He begins to get concerned, but he doesn't want to upset him or Jennifer quite yet. He does call her from the Hansons' landline to let her know her parents were not home. That's when she tells him she remembered Kate had called her a couple times the night before, around 10 p.m. and again at 10:06 p.m. She missed her first call, but Jennifer's daughter picked it up and she talked to her. It must not have been that in-depth, since Kate called back just 6 minutes later. It could have been just a, "Hey, have your mom call me back," or let her know I called. But Jennifer was getting ready for bed, so she opted not to answer the second call, and she would just return Kate's call in the morning. Belinda, Bob, and Catherine decide to leave together in Bob's car to check if the Hansons are at Kate and Jimmy's house. Bob knows he spoke to Eric that morning, and had Eric noticed anything, he definitely would have said something. He would still be on his flight at this time, so Bob planned to call him later. Bob doesn't know that Kiyoshi already made it to the South's home. When he gets to Jimmy's house, Kiyoshi rang the doorbell, but nobody answered. There are plenty of windows in the house, as you can see, so he starts to look through them. And that's when he made a gruesome and frightening discovery. He saw a woman's body on the floor surrounded by blood. He was terrified. It's your worst nightmare. Your mind is racing. What does it mean? Did Jimmy do something? Is Jimmy okay? What do you do? He immediately calls his daughter because he cannot believe what he just saw, and he can't bring himself to go look again. And he tells her, "Please hurry up. I need help." And he needs someone to confirm that what he saw was real. His heart is racing. He begins pacing outside. Then he's sitting down on the sidewalk with his head in his hands as he waits for his daughter to arrive. Kiyoshi's worst nightmare was true. There was a body of a woman on the floor. It was too far away from the window to make out who it was, but they assumed it was Kate. They quickly called the police, and no one had a key to the house, so when the fire department arrived, they had to kick the front door in. Kiyoshi runs inside. The first thing he saw was a person's lifeless, bloody, bludgeoned body, stiff and frozen, in an upright position on a couch in the family room. There was an open laptop on the floor. Kiyoshi didn't recognize this person. He couldn't even make out the clothing because they were so soaked in blood. He couldn't tell what color they were. What was terrifying was the person really had no face. There's no other way to describe this. Their face was bashed in. It was completely unrecognizable. Kiyoshi scans the room in a matter of seconds. He runs past that person up the stairs to look for Jimmy. He had to find him. What had happened here? Yesterday was a normal day. The couple had left work together. They were happy, and now they're dead. No one was upstairs, and his first thought was, this was a group of people. They came in, they broke in. Jimmy fought two of them off. He beat them. He left them dead. He tried to escape with Kate. They were both captured and kidnapped and probably going to be held for ransom. That person on the laptop was probably forcing Jimmy to give up his bank account information at gunpoint. The police asked Kiyoshi to exit the house because the forensic team, police, as well as detectives, needed it to be cleared for entry. Back at Ron and Andy's house, Ron is still perplexed as to why Terry hasn't returned their calls. It's getting later into the afternoon. He's half watching, half listening to the TV when a breaking news special interrupts his show. It's the local news reporting on a young couple found killed in their Aurora home. He got chills. He continued watching, but he just had this feeling that it was going to be Jimmy and Kate. The neighborhood looked so familiar, and then they pan across the house. It was evident in that moment that it was the Sal's house. The brick, the corner lot, everything. It had bright yellow crime scene tape up around it. People standing outside, being questioned, others crying. Ron and Andy were horrified. They figured this is why the Hansons hadn't returned their calls. It was because of this horrific family tragedy. They didn't know what to do. It wasn't the right time to go calling them to question them about what happened. Besides, they weren't even sure anyone knew because it was breaking news. This had just happened. By the time Bob, Belinda, and Catherine arrive at the Sal's, the authorities were already on the scene and Terry's silver Impala was parked in the driveway. They knew this wasn't good. One of the first detectives handling this case was Michael Nils from the Aurora Police Department. He did a walkthrough, and even though he's worked on many crime scenes, and I know a lot of detectives say this, but this was truly one of the most devastating scenes he had ever experienced in his entire career. So brutal and so excessive, and right away he thought, this cannot be a simple robbery. The injuries were too severe. It had to be someone evil, someone that wanted to send a message. First, he came across who was later positively identified during the autopsy as Jimmy Sal. Nils could hardly look. The body had no face. It was demolished. All the teeth had been shattered. There was nearly nothing left, which is why Jimmy's brother probably ran right past him, still holding out hope that Jimmy was alive and that this person, still sitting up with a laptop beside them on the floor, was an intruder. It seemed as though the attacker came up from behind Jimmy and ambushed him without a moment for him to react. Nils didn't see any weapons. Then he walks toward the master bedroom and found Kate on the floor in the doorway. She was covered in wounds, too many for him to count. Different shapes, some circles, others squares, various sizes and depths, places on her body, big welts all over her head, clearly hit repeatedly over and over again in the face until she was unrecognizable. And he could tell she was fighting to stay alive. She was defending herself until she took her last breath. There were defensive wounds all over her hands and her arms, and Nils could tell just by looking at the unnatural position of her arms that both of them were broken. They were snapped in half by her attacker as she was trying to protect herself. There was blood all over. The ceilings, the walls, windows, drapes, floors everywhere. Kate was running. She was trying to find a way out, to live for everything that she hoped and dreamed for. She most likely witnessed the man that she loved being bludgeoned, or at the least already deceased, and appearing the way he just had. It's unimaginable to me. To think about hearing someone you love screaming in pain, to think about running for your life only to be trapped in your own bedroom, the bedroom that you kissed your husband goodnight in the night before, where you laughed together and dreamed together. It absolutely sickens me. He continued into the kitchen, and there was a big plastic painter's tarp on the floor. It didn't take long to notice. It was only covering half of a woman's body. He could not believe he was stumbling upon a third victim. It was Mary Hansen. She was deceased, lying face up in a blood-soaked nightgown, with a single hole in her face on the right side of her upper lip. He heard Aurora Police Lieutenant Rusty Sullivan yell that he found another body. It was Terry Hansen. His body was found in the garage, lying between a Lexus and a Mercedes. He was also dressed in his pajamas. Terry's head was wrapped in some kind of washcloth and then covered with a plastic bag. He was on top of the same plastic painter's tarp that Mary was on. The method used in Mary and Terry's case was completely different from Kate and Jimmy's, which led detectives to believe there could be more than one perpetrator. Perhaps Kate and Jimmy were the targets, and Mary and Terry got in the way somehow. Terry had been shot one time in the left side of the back of his head. Both Terry and Mary were barefoot. Their feet were clean, as if they hadn't walked there on their own. Besides, why would anyone willingly come over in their pajamas without wearing shoes? Detectives suspect the Hansens were deceased prior to arriving at the Sows, that they were killed somewhere else, then placed there to somehow stage the scene. But why? And where were they killed and when? There were so many questions that needed to be answered. But first, Nils knew he had to do something he despised. It may be the hardest part of his job, worse than walking a crime scene. He had to break the news to everyone that they had found an entire family annihilated. Bob was the first person to be notified, and he knew he would have to be the one to call and break the news to Eric and Jennifer. That was probably the hardest thing he ever had to do up until this point in his life. Nils notified Jimmy's family next. They were on the scene, waiting outside, and the news just spread. Within no time, there were news trucks surrounding the Sows residence. Terry and Mary's best friends, Ron and Andy, were glued to the TV. The news came back on and reported they found Terry and Mary, both deceased. It didn't seem real. Today, they were all supposed to be leaving on a retreat. They were supposed to be walking down cobblestone roads, enjoying dinners by candlelight, wine tastings, watching the sunset. They had a whole weekend planned, and this was so far off track from what they imagined they'd be doing. It felt like they were having an out-of-body experience. It was just too surreal. This can't happen to people like the Hansons. You never think this will happen to people that you know and love, people so close to you. Every time I get to this part, I get so sad. I feel close to these people. I just thought back to the note that Eric wrote. Mom, Dad, see you Sunday. Have fun in Galena. It's important to pay attention because the evidence in this case is all over the place. There's so much evidence, yet it leaves so many questions unanswered. Or does it? That's up to you to decide. There are 2 separate police departments working on this case. The one in Aurora, with Detective Nils handling the Sows home, and the Naperville Police Department, who would be investigating the Hansons' residence. The lead detective in Naperville is Michael Saylor. So we have Michael Nils in Aurora and Michael Saylor in Naperville. Saylor was attempting to get a warrant to search the Hansons' residence. Different jurisdiction, rules, procedure, and the crime scene was discovered at the Sows' residence. So while the search warrant is pending, Naperville police begin to canvass the area around the Hansons' residence, while the Aurora police spread out and begin to canvass the area in the Sows neighborhood, starting with family, friends, and neighbors. Deborah Cheriskin, whose backyard backs up to the Hansons' backyard, told Detective Saylor that her dog was being antsy just around 2 a.m., so she let him out into the backyard. As she was standing there, she looked up at the Hansons' house and she noticed all of the lights in the entire house were on, even the light in Eric's bedroom that was in the basement. She said the whole house was bright, and in all the years she's lived there, she has never once seen lights on like that at that hour. When she woke up for the day around 6 a.m., she let her dog out. This time, the only light that was on was the one in the kitchen, which was completely normal for that time of day. Another neighbor, Michael Wenzel, said he was catching a flight early that morning at 4:30 a.m. He lived on the street and he had to pass the Hansons as he drove away. There was an ordinance in this community which prohibited vehicles from being parked on the street between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. That morning, though, there wasn't just one car parked outside the Hansons' house on the street. There were 3. One was a dark-colored SUV, the other one was a light-colored sedan, and the third one was an SUV of some kind, but he couldn't make out the color. Mary had a black Saturn SUV and Terry drove a silver Impala. The police had to figure out who the third vehicle belonged to. They got their first clue when they questioned Nancy Herrera, the Hansons' next-door neighbor. She was leaving her house between 5 and 5:30 that morning. She said she was very familiar with all the vehicles that belonged to the Hanson family. She said she saw Eric's black Chevy parked on the street, and that was unusual. He always parked in the driveway. Police knew from speaking to Bob that Eric was up early to catch his flight, and we know he had driven to the convenience store early that morning to grab cigarettes. You're allowed to park on the street after 5 a.m., so there wasn't an issue there. But as for why the other vehicles were parked on the street earlier, there wasn't an answer yet. Mary's SUV was currently parked in the Hansons' garage next to a motorcycle belonging to Eric. However, Terry's car was not there. Detectives on the scene at the Sows confirmed that Terry's Impala was parked in the Sows' driveway. When Aurora police questioned the Sows neighbors, a woman named Nisha Kalra that lived right across the street said that she left around 6 in the morning to drop her son off at school. She saw the silver car in the driveway when she left. However, when she left, it was parked on the far left-hand side of the driveway, facing the garage door. When she returned, about 15 to 30 minutes later, the car was parked on the opposite side. So now it's on the far right, pulled into the driveway, facing the garage door. That's weird. And it stayed there. Bob confirmed this was Terry's car. We'll go back to this timeline, but let's jump all the way to 10 p.m. that night. Saylor entered the Hansons' home after obtaining the search warrant. He was instructed to find out if there was evidence of a crime scene at the Hansons because Aurora police were adamant that Mary and Terry had not been killed at the Sows' home. They had been murdered somewhere else and then transported to the Sows' crime scene. There was no apparent forced entry at the Hansons. Upon entering, the first thing that Saylor noticed was the smell. It was a combination of scented candles and charred wood. He found 12 candles and a centerpiece candle holder on the table in the kitchen, and another candle on the kitchen island. All of the candles were melted down, and there was wax that had dripped onto the surfaces underneath. The coffee pot was filled with water and unused coffee grounds as though it was ready to be turned on and brewed. He didn't notice anything suspicious. He turned his attention to the fireplace. There were still embers burning inside. A big chunk of charred wood was in there, some type of fabric that had like a tight weave, a ball of melted plastic, and what looked like pieces of paper with numbers on them. Maybe the fact that these unusual items were in the fireplace was why it was burning so strongly when Catherine, Belinda, and Bob witnessed it. After Saylor completed an entire walkthrough, he did not notice anything that looked disturbed. It was late, so he had to leave, and he planned to come back the next day. This search took a few days. They had to be super thorough, as I'm sure you can imagine. A team of investigators, including police officers, detectives, DNA analysts, they were all there as well. Then, a clue. Crime scene investigators removed the Hansons' bedding. They discovered 2 holes in a wooden headboard. This confused me a little bit, so listen carefully and we'll try to go through this. One was more toward the top of the headboard and the other one was toward the bottom. The one on the top went all the way through to the other side. The one on the bottom looked like a hole that you would try to drill, but the drill wouldn't go all the way through. There were tiny wood shavings that were around, and the 2 holes were not the same size. The top one was bigger, and it looked like it had been enlarged with a drill. When checking behind the headboard, they noticed the hole on top had a blown out look to it in the back. They followed the direction of the hole, and sure enough, there was another hole through the wall behind the headboard. The hole was also drilled. There were like drywall shavings that were on the floor. But get this. All of the holes were filled. The one on the wall with spackling compound and the headboard holes with wood filler. Were these bullet holes? That was the question. They did an extensive search and they uncovered a bullet stuck in the attic in a beam behind the bedroom wall. This was really starting to paint a picture of what transpired. It seemed as though the Hansons were shot in their own home, in their master bedroom, probably while they were sleeping. That's why they were in their pajamas with bare feet, unlike Jimmy and Kate, who were dressed in their regular daytime attire. But what still remained a mystery was why the bodies would be moved from the Hansons to the Sows. Why go through all that trouble? What was the timeline? Surely the Hansons were not having a sleepover over the Sows. Were they there when Jimmy and Kate were attacked? It truly amazes me how thorough crime scene investigators are. I mean, I know it's their job, but these investigators end up checking in the vacuum cleaner. Inside the receptacle bag, they find pieces of wood that match the headboard. The killer took time to vacuum, to fill holes in the wall, to make beds. The CSI goes back into the master bedroom and they examine the mattress and it's totally clean. There's no blood, no nothing. However, upon further investigation, they check a guest bedroom down the hall and they find a bloody mattress. They had been switched out. The clean one that was in the guest room is now in the Hansons' bedroom and vice versa. And all of the beds had been remade. They also confirmed a linen closet's shelves had empty spaces, which indicated that sheets were missing. They noted the indentations on the carpet that showed that the master bed had been moved. All of this takes time. It's definitely a staged scene, and so was the sows, since the Hansons were clearly moved to the other residence, which is why they were wrapped up, so that blood and DNA wouldn't transfer anywhere and they would be easier to move. Other items of significance that were found. On October 3rd, in the garage, they found the wood spackling compound, sanding blocks, paint, and in the basement, there was an empty bottle of carpet cleaner, another one that was open, paper towels, cleaning products, a carpet shampooer, as well as a cordless drill and drill bits, and they were in a container and one of them was missing. There were also what looked like bloodstains in Mary's SUV on the carpet in the back, and her keys were found inside the home. Towels in the bathroom looked exactly the same as the one that was on Terry's head, and similar plastic bags were found underneath the sink in the kitchen, and that matched the one on Terry's head. Jennifer was in her parents' home that afternoon with detectives. She was gathering clothing for her parents' funeral. She also provided detectives with a bunch of papers that she had found when she was going through Mary's top drawer in her dresser. One was a credit report in Mary's name with circles around certain transactions and then question marks beside them. They wondered if the Hansons were experiencing financial issues. Detectives needed to gather information from anyone close to the Hansons. Even though it's a tough time, they have to. Jennifer and Eric lost their parents and their sister. Bob lost his family members. The Sows lost Jimmy and Kate. There's just so much loss, yet it has to be done. They have to be questioned. And sadly, they have to relive that pain in the moment. It can also make you feel really nervous and uncomfortable and as if you're a suspect. By October 5th, they still hadn't arrested anyone. All they had was circumstantial evidence, no witnesses, and no weapons. Lieutenant Sullivan from the Aurora Police Department issued a statement regarding the murders. He held a press conference confirming 4 individuals had been identified as 34-year-old Jimmy Sow, his 31-year-old wife Kate Sow, Kate's parents, 57-year-old Terry Hansen, and his 55-year-old wife Mary. They pleaded with the public to provide any information they may have about this crime. The autopsy report was also released and it's bad. Both Kate and Jimmy's fatal injuries were caused by blunt force trauma to the head. Very excessive force from something like a bat, a golf club, a pipe. Jimmy's lower jaw was found across the room. Kate's ring finger was bent backwards and broken, and her wedding ring, that was valued at over $24,000, was gone. Her ring finger, though, had no indentation from a ring and no cuts and no bruises. Kate sustained 40 wounds, 22 of which were cuts and scrapes and bumps on her head, and 18 more on her body and her limbs. Jimmy had at least 12 separate injuries to his head, but it only took one skull-crushing blow to end both of their lives. Several of the wounds found on the bodies had specific indentations in the shapes of circles and squares, and this made me pause to think what kind of instrument could cause that. Oddly, when they said pipe, the very first thing I thought of was a metal pipe with a 4-point iron T and 1 or more galvanized pipe plugs. I just remember picking one up as a teen when my dad was doing some plumbing, and I actually morbidly pictured the damage that it would do. It would be like a hammer with many different ways of hitting someone. Some marks it would leave would be squares, like the top of the galvanized area, and then others would be circles or holes where you have the holes of the T that are left open. Or you could just use the straight part of the pipe while gripping it at the T, and this would provide a really secure, strong grip as you swing it. You can easily buy these items at a local hardware store and you would never look suspicious. If you cleaned it off and you threw it somewhere, it would also be pretty inconspicuous. We already know the Hansons' cause of death. There was nothing additional in the autopsy report besides finding gunshot residue stippling on Terry's head. This indicated a second gunshot was fired near Terry's head but did not hit him. This was most likely the shot to Mary's face. Let's jump back to when the bodies were first discovered the afternoon of the 29th. Since Bob was on the scene at the Sows, Nils interviewed him right away. He asked Bob when he last spoke to any of the deceased, who had access to the homes, and if he knew anyone that would do this. Bob said the only person he knew that could have access to both homes would possibly be Eric, and that he had spoken to him that morning. Of course, the people closest to the victims are always looked at first, so this piques Nils' interest. He wanted to dig deeper, especially because Eric was conveniently out of town. He didn't want to tip Eric off. He didn't even know his parents were dead yet, so he reached out to Allison instead. Eric was still en route to LA at the time. Allison said the plan to go to the concert was her idea, and they made those plans weeks in advance. Then she told them everything we already know about the night before, but there were some inconsistencies. She said she spoke to Eric at 6:45 last evening. He said he was on his way to the gym, and we know he was actually meeting with Christine. Then at 9:21, he called to say he was leaving the gym and stopping by a hardware store. That's interesting. Were you buying, paint, painter's tarps, filler for holes in the wall? Why would he need to go there that night? I don't know. But we do know he was actually still with Christine at that time until about 10:15, and detectives confirmed that timeline with her. At 11:30 p.m., he called Allison to tell her he was on his way home from having a drink with a friend named Jared. Another lie. He also told Allison to call him at home on the landline. She thought that was a little bit odd because she wasn't used to calling that late at night, but he said, "My phone's dying, I have really bad connection in the basement," and that's when him and Terry answered the phone at the same time. Allison also mentioned that if anything was happening in the house, Eric would have definitely been able to hear it. She lived there in the basement. He's a light sleeper, and you can hear the garage door opening. You can hear the plumbing through the walls. You could even hear people just walking around upstairs. Look, he could have been lying just to cover up the fact that he was with another woman. But Allison says she thought it was odd that he asked her where the nearest Nike store was in LA. She said, "You don't need sneakers. It's hot out. We'll be wearing sandals." He also never told her that he forgot his wallet at home and missed his flight. He said he missed it because he was stuck in traffic. Nils asked her what his relationship was like with his family, and Allison tells him Eric felt like his family gave him a hard time, that his sisters were already established in life and he wasn't, so he felt kind of jealous, especially of Jimmy and Kate's life. She went from being a waitress to being able to afford designer purses, driving nice cars, not having to worry, and technically she hadn't even worked for it. Jimmy did. Yet Kate would look down upon Eric. She would make it a point to talk down about him to his mother and tell his mom not to help him, yet Jimmy is providing for Kate with everything. Allison said Eric was trying. He landed a new job a few months ago and he was doing better than ever. They tell Allison if she can think of anything else, let them know. But please, do not tell Eric anything yet. They know it's hard, but this is a murder investigation. A quadruple murder investigation. Nils reaches out to Eric's boss, Mike Stoker. He said Eric was the company's lowest producer and the job was 100% commission-based. Between the time Eric started in April 2005 to September, he only made $8,391.03. Definitely not enough to live a lavish lifestyle. He admitted to Mike that his parents took care of everything because they were well off. Nils asked if there was anything unusual about Eric, and he said not really until recently. His attendance had been fine in the beginning, but then all of a sudden at the end of August, he started to be more and more absent, and by September, he was hardly coming to work. Then he tells Nils, Eric doesn't even work here anymore. Apparently on September 19th, Eric left a voice message for Mike saying that his brother-in-law, Jennifer's husband, died in a very bad car accident. He said that unfortunately he needed to fly to Minnesota for the funeral, and he never talked to his boss again. Nils asked if Eric had left anything behind at work, and if so, please bring it to the police station. Bob had already told Jennifer the horrible news, and she was completely distraught, yet Nils had to do his job and speak with her. She confirmed Eric had been spending a lot of money leading up to September and always had issues with overspending. She actually questioned him a few times about where he was getting all the money, and she was concerned that their mother was being taken advantage of. She said that at the beginning of last month in August, Kate and Mary were at the Hansons talking about taking a trip together to Hawaii. When Mary was checking how many miles she had on her United Airlines credit card, she was confused as to why there were so many accounts under her name. Kate immediately suspected Eric had opened up these extra accounts and was using the credit cards in his mom's name. They kind of put two and two together and they figured out he was probably racking up the frequent flyer miles, and that's how he was getting to California. They confronted Eric that day and he admitted to it. he promised he would pay Mary back. Of course, Mary was upset, but she was even more upset that Kate really came down hard on Eric. It was not a pleasant conversation. It was loud and angry, judgmental, just putting him down left and right. Mary just thought Kate was a bit harsh, and she was worried that Eric would do something. He would go into a downward spiral and harm himself. Mary allowed Eric to come up with a payment plan, but Kate would not let it go. She just kept digging, and she was able to uncover that Eric had charged around $80,000 to Mary's credit cards. Again, she and Mary confronted Eric, and this time it was worse. He already said he was going to pay her back, but Kate didn't believe him, and she didn't think he ever could, so she threatened to tell Terry. On August 14th, Kate called Jennifer and explained all of this. She said Mary promised not to tell Terry, but Kate said, "You know what? I've had enough. Mom, you keep enabling him. Enough is enough. I'm telling Dad." This is when Eric freaks out and he yelled, "If you tell Dad, I will fucking kill you." I understand people can say things they don't mean in the heat of the moment, but Kate was so upset. She got so scared that she called Jennifer the next day and she said, "Listen, I can't even leave my house. I have to miss work today." Jennifer said Katie was still determined to make Eric pay, and she went so far as to reach out to Allison. She called her up and she simply said, "Hey, Allison, if I were you, I would check your credit report." No one knew if there was any other details given to Allison, but that happened. Jennifer said her husband Corey was never in a car accident. He's not dead. Just yesterday, September 28th, Eric had just called to speak to Corey, asking him if he wanted to go to a Vikings game next week in Minnesota, and if they were going to go, could Eric spend the night at their place? Eric never stayed over when he visited Minnesota. He stayed with friends. So Nils just straight up asked Jennifer if she thought Eric could have done this, and she says yes. She believes that if Terry would have found out about what Eric did, he would have called the police. Eric had already been in trouble with the law. He had already been in prison. If he got another charge against him, he'd probably be going away for a while. She then says, yes, Eric did this. Even though none of this actually means Eric is a murderer, Nils thinks something isn't right. He calls Allison back and asks if she had ever seen Eric become violent. She says no, but he did yell at her recently. That same month, he kept asking her on various occasions whether she had been talking to Kate. Allison lied, and she said no. Eric said if he ever found out that she was speaking with Kate, she was going to get it. Those were his exact words. And Allison asked what Eric meant by that, and he said, "Wait and see." She asked if that was a threat, and he said, "That's a fact." After Nils learns that Eric threatened not one but two people close to him in the weeks leading up to the murders, he now becomes the prime suspect. We don't know if Allison told Eric anything about the situation before anyone reached out to him after this. She is his girlfriend, or was his fiance, still having a relationship with him. She's known him for years. She's probably the closest person to him. My thoughts are she probably told him. He lands at 1:45 p.m. Pacific time. He calls Allison, who's still at work, and she allegedly tells him, "Just go to my apartment and relax until I get home." It's around 4 p.m. back in Illinois. I have a hard time believing she didn't tell him about his parents. She lived with his parents. She was close to that family. What do you think? Around 5:30 or 6, Bob calls Eric to let him know what happened to his family. Bob already has suspicions after speaking with Nils. Tensions are running high. Everybody wants answers. When Eric picks up, Bob allegedly says, "I'm hearing there's 4 deceased bodies at Kate's home." Bob tells Nils that Eric's response was, "How did people know to go looking over there?" What? I'm thinking, okay, did he really say that? This is the same person that they are saying took all that time and effort to patch up holes, switch out mattresses, vacuum. Would he seriously make a remark like that? I'm just asking your thoughts. Bob hands the phone to Nils. He makes a note that Eric is not acting like someone who just found out their family died. He wasn't asking questions. He told the police everything we already know. That's how we got that information. That was his story. The night out with Christine, the phone calls to Allison, going home, waking up, that whole story. Then Nils said, "Jennifer thinks you did this." Wow. Nils specifically asks Eric if he had anything to do with this, and he says no, and that he didn't have any idea who would. He tells Eric that he knows. he had an argument with Kate over using his parents' identities to get credit cards. Eric admits he had taken money like 4 years ago, but he already paid that back and that Kate was always putting her nose in everyone's business. Eric said he never threatened her and that she wasn't even at the house the day that Mary confronted him about this. She just kept calling over and over and over again while they were talking. She was trying to get in the middle of an issue that him and his mom were working out. He also asked Nils, why didn't you just call me first right away instead of asking Jennifer and Bob things about me? He tells him, I was the one that told Bob to give you the phone. I wanted to talk to you. He responds to Eric by telling him that detectives are going to fly out to LA to speak with him face to face. The first flight that they can get doesn't arrive until midnight. Eric agrees to meet them at LAX. But then Nils calls back a little while later and he says, never mind, they cannot get there until 10:30 a.m. the next morning. Eric said that's fine. He wants them to know that just because he's in the airport right now, waiting on them, doesn't mean that he's trying to run. Okay. After this call, around 11:49 p.m. Central, 9:49 Pacific, Eric cancels his plans to meet up with Allison. He tells her, I'm getting a hotel and I'm going to take a nap. However, that's not true. Eric was actually trying to book a flight home. He tried to book one from the Southwest desk, but when the ticket agent was looking up notes under his name in the computer, an alert came up and it said, if this passenger tries to check in, contact the LAPD and that he's dangerous. Unfortunately, instead of actually contacting the LAPD, she tells Eric that he's been flagged in the computer. So he leaves that counter and he goes to the United Airlines counter instead. Here he was able to book a flight back to Chicago, leaving at 11:05 p.m. and he was able to get on that flight. So was he running or was he just trying to go back home? Now remember, Detective Saylor was just entering the Hansons' home at 10 p.m. So no one knew any of the additional evidence that was found. But these detectives do not sleep. So overnight, they have combined all of the statements from the neighbors, family members, and they're trying to piece it all together so that they can build a case. It didn't prove that Eric did this, but they had to question him. The next morning, September 30th, Nils gets a call from the FBI saying that Eric's parking stub had been swiped at Chicago Midway Airport and that he left the lot at 6:30 in the morning. Nils calls Eric's phone. Eric lies and says he's still in LA waiting on detectives. However, they're tracking his phone, and he's actually driving westbound on Interstate 88 in Illinois towards Interstate 39, which was how you would get to Minnesota, where Jennifer lived. Now they were scared he was on the way to murder her, the only surviving heir, and the one person who's accusing him of killing his whole family and revealing his secrets. They tell Jennifer to get her family and leave just in case. A Madison, Wisconsin trooper named Craig Morehouse got a dispatch call to be on the lookout for a black Chevy Trailblazer with Illinois plates. This was around I-90 West, and they gave him a description of Eric. Sure enough, he sees Eric's vehicle. He calls for assistance. 3 additional officers join in, and when Eric tried to exit, they pulled him over. Eric was apprehended. They handcuffed him, threw him in the back of a police car, and they told him he was under arrest for an outstanding warrant. He told them he had no idea there was a warrant for his arrest. What was it for? They explained it was for the intimidation in connection with the threats he made to Kate. Eric said he knew that the police wanted to talk to him, that his family had just died, but he had no idea that they were actively trying to find him to arrest him. He didn't know that he couldn't freely go anywhere that he wanted to. He was taken to a Wisconsin police department where he would wait to be interviewed by Nils. Meanwhile, his vehicle was being towed back to Aurora so it could undergo a thorough investigation. Police officer Ronaldo Riviera found shopping bags full of brand new clothes that had just been purchased that day with one of Mary's credit cards. There was a wallet on the passenger seat with about $750 in it. In the center console, he found Eric's ID and driver's license and 9 credit cards. 9. Some were in his name, others were in Mary's name, and guess what? One of them was in Allison's name. So let me get this straight. After he finds out that his mother's deceased and the police are aware that he's committed credit card fraud, he's out using Mary's credit card again. Officer Riviera also collected a Ziploc bag that he retrieved from the floor that was underneath the passenger seat, and when he looked inside, he could see 2 pairs of green vinyl gloves, and it looked like they had dried blood on them. Then he makes a pretty big discovery. Kate's wedding ring and one of Jimmy's gold Rolex watches with a bunch of diamonds in it was found in the glove compartment. A GPS device was recovered from the Chevy as well, and forensic analysis showed it had been turned off between 7:30 p.m. the night of the murders and 9:30 a.m. the day after. Things are not looking good for Eric, not at all. Not to mention, more and more evidence was being turned over from the Hansons, as well as more information from Eric's friends and family. Eric's boss handed over a checkbook belonging to Mary that he found when he cleaned out Eric's office desk. Detective Saylor found financial documents in Mary's name consisting of credit reports and a bunch of handwritten notes regarding account balances and credit card statements, and they were stuck between the mattress and the box spring in Eric's bedroom. After Nils presented Allison with additional evidence against Eric, she finally admitted that shortly before September 28th, 2005, Eric had told her he calculated exactly how much money he would inherit if his parents died. She also said she remembered when she was living at the Hansons, Eric would go rifling through Terry's documents in his home office. When questioned about Eric's room, his habits, and whether he was tidy and used cleaning products, Allison and Bob both said it would be highly unusual if Eric's room was clean. Eric even called himself a slob, and Bob never saw that room in order. Allison echoed this by saying that Eric was very messy. As all this additional evidence is pouring in, Nils is interviewing Eric. He questioned him for 3 days, just trying to break him down and get him to talk. They kept asking him, if it wasn't you, who was it? All the while, they needed forensics to provide more concrete evidence to link Eric to the crimes and build a case. Remember that Eric was apprehended on the 30th. That was the first full day the forensic team was in the Hansons' home. The same 3 days that Eric's being questioned, evidence is being uncovered and reported to Nils. Eric continues to deny any involvement. Forensic analysis of Jimmy's laptop showed that the very last keystroke happened at 10:43 p.m. on September 28th. Let me ask you this. Could Eric have left Christine's at 10:15, made it to the Sal's residence, bludgeoned both of them so severely, leaving no evidence behind, no weapons, no fingerprints, then left their house, drove home, was able to be on the phone with Allison at home at 11:30 when Terry picked up, waited until his parents both fell asleep, shot them in the room, wrapped them up, carried them, put them in the SUV, driven back over to the Sal's residence, got them both into the house without alerting any neighbors or the 24-hour patrolman, then make sure there's nothing at that whole scene again, drive back home, somehow get Terry's Impala over to the Sal's without a car to drive back, but also be back at the Hansons patching up walls, cleaning carpets, switching mattresses, burning evidence, getting rid of weapons, organizing the whole house, and make it to the airport by 11 a.m. the next morning. You tell me. This was their working theory. Nils confronts Eric about the Rolex and Kate's wedding ring. He said, yeah, he was in possession of both of them. He was supposed to drop them off before he went on the plane to LA, but he was running late. He left them in his car in a secured area in the glove compartment for safekeeping until he returned. He explained that Kate had taken off her ring a few days ago when she was at the Hansons painting flower pots and gardening with Mary. The Rolex was over the Hansons because Kate wanted Terry to try it on, so they knew how many links they'd need to add or take off of a band for the one that Jimmy was planning on getting Terry for Christmas. Kate had instructed Eric to bring them by their house as soon as possible. So he had put them in a bag, and he meant to take them with him so that he could bring them to Kate's, but he was running late. No matter how hard the detectives pressed him, he never confessed, and he finally asked for an attorney. Detective Nils actually broke down and cried when he wasn't able to get the confession. It's just that everything had built up. It was so emotional. But police said, you know what, we don't even need a confession to prosecute him. In an October 8th jailhouse interview, he said he was innocent. I have a couple of very short excerpts from that call.
I think I'm just tired of everything being so one-sided. Everyone, I believe, wants to make me out to look like, I'm just a horrible person. I can do something like this. And I'm not. It's very difficult. How would you feel if, people are saying you killed your family?
He doesn't sound like he's lying there. That's what's scary. You could also still love your parents even though you killed them. Of course, the investigation didn't stop. As he waits to be extradited back to Illinois from Wisconsin on the intimidation charges, authorities are continuing to build their case. More and more evidence was mounting. Women that Eric dated were now coming forward, and it seemed like he had girlfriends everywhere. Some even told the police that Eric said he was a professional golfer, and most of them believed he was very wealthy. Plain and simple, the police think that greed was the motive here, and the more they dug into the Hansons' financial records, the more Eric's elaborate scheme became apparent. That credit report that Jennifer had pulled out from Mary's dresser, that was dated August 13th, 2005. It was a day before Kate called Jennifer and told her that Eric had threatened to kill her if she told Terry. Forensic accountants were able to piece together a timeline of events dating back to the beginning of 2004. That was when Eric started using credit cards from accounts he opened in his parents' names. He had cleverly opened a P.O. box and had all the statements coming there instead of the Hansons' home. And back then, people weren't logging on to their iPhone or their, Android app to check their banking accounts. So they were not seeing what they were spending. He would open up a number of accounts and then he would max one card out. Then he'd open up another card and then he would pay off the one he maxed out, and he would just keep doing this over and over again. At some point though, it just wasn't sustainable, so he began concocting a new plan. He started forging checks from his mother's checkbook and depositing them into his bank account. Finally, he began his final scheme, with the very last transaction occurring on the exact day that the Hansons were killed. It began with obtaining a $48,000 loan in his father's name. How do you even do that? He was living off that for a while, but of course he spent it. And on the day of the murders, he once again used Terry's identity to secure a $13,000 loan with a check payable to Mary Hanson. He was home waiting for it, and it was delivered right to the Hansons' front door by FedEx. He then forged Mary's signature, and he took that check and put it into his checking account. Finally, a couple months later, Friday, December 4th, 2005, DuPage State Attorney Joseph Burkett announced 44 charges stemming from the murders, including 4 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of armed robbery, 2 counts of aggravated kidnapping, 2 counts of identity theft. Some of the other charges were forgery, credit card fraud, mail fraud, and 2 counts of home invasion. Burkett said if convicted, Eric would be eligible for the death penalty. Eric pleads not guilty on all counts. His trial was set for February 2008. While awaiting trial, Eric begins writing letters to Bob and Jennifer. In one to Jennifer, he says, quote, "Jenny, I know a lot more than you think. Dad talked to me about a lot more than anyone else thought. It's obvious that you're trying to pull the wool over my eyes, but it won't work. You can't avoid the paper trail. P.S. No matter how much you try to screw me, I still love you." Interesting letter. I don't know what he meant by the paper trail. How would she be pulling the wool over his eyes? Confused me. In another letter to Jennifer, who is now the executor of the parents' estate, Eric detailed his knowledge of all of his parents' assets nearly to the penny. This was something Jennifer hadn't even known until she became the executor. Eric somehow also knew the value of all of his sister Kate's personal property, including the value of each and every one of her designer bags. In an 11-page letter to Bob from jail, Eric stated that he had told Kate to stay out of his life or she would regret it. He also wrote that Kate did ask him if he was threatening her, and he said, "No, I'm promising." During the month-long trial, the prosecution called a number of expert witnesses to present evidence that leaned toward Eric being connected to the murders. I wish I could go into this entire trial. I love, I did go to law school, but I love just knowing every little detail of how all the evidence was presented that the jury had when they determined the verdict. I'm not going to be able to tell you everything, but I'm going to tell you the most important things. So here they are. Jimmy's DNA was on the watch. The stains on the green gloves were a match to Terry and Mary's DNA. The Ziploc bag was determined to come from a box that was at the Hansons' home. The bullet found in the wall matched the ones in Terry and Mary. Terry's DNA was found in the back of the SUV where the stains were found. However, there was also a lack of evidence. There was a fingerprint on the gloves that didn't match Eric's. However, testing wasn't done to compare it to Terry and Mary's. Detective Nils testified to what the driving times would be under the conditions that were similar to the night in question on September 28, 2005. From Christine's apartment to the Sows home, it was about 10 to 15 minutes. From the Sows home to the Hansons, it was approximately 5 minutes. However, I mapped it myself and it said it was 12 minutes. That was back in 2005. Maybe it's a lot busier now. The defense argued Kate wasn't wearing her ring that week, and they showed a CCTV video from a store taken shortly before the murders in which the ring was absent from her finger. The prosecution argued the video was way too fuzzy. You wouldn't be able to tell if she was wearing a ring or not. They thought what was more significant was that Eric's DNA wasn't even on the ring or the watch. And this showed that he hadn't even picked up the jewelry from his house to put it in a bag, to put in his car, to return it to them when he was on his way to the airport, as he claimed, unless he was wearing gloves. The thing is, touch DNA can be very unreliable. Some of us were not shedders, especially if he had just taken a shower, which he said he had before leaving for his trip. Kate's ring did contain a reddish stain, but no DNA was able to be lifted. The state says this is because he wiped it. Eric's defense attorney argued there were 2 unidentified fingerprints in the Saturn, which would mean strangers unconnected to the Hanson family could have accessed the vehicle. The prosecution came right back and said no, the fingerprints were unable to be lifted from the surface. That's why they were unidentifiable. They just were not able to be used for comparison. And then the defense comes back and says, well, either way, that evidence is inconclusive. So that meant there was no evidence to prove that the fingerprints could not have been left there by one or both of the Hansons. The defense further emphasized there were no bloody shoes, bloody shoe marks, clothing, possible murder weapons ever found. The state brings up the fact that there was a raging fire in the Hansons' fireplace that was burning with no one home. It was highly unusual that someone would start a fire and then just leave. The fire was burning so intensely that when Bob was there, a burning log tumbled out of the fireplace. And it was so intense that embers were still warm at 10:30 p.m. when Detective Saylor came in. And let's not forget, there was a chunk of charred wood, a melted ball of plastic, papers with numbers written on them, and a piece of fabric. Was the chunk of wood a baseball bat that was used to bludgeon Jimmy and Kate? Was the fabric from, Eric's bloody clothes? And was the big blob bloody gloves or even bloody shoes? One argument that stood out to me was that because Eric had shaved off all of his body hair right before he left for Los Angeles, he did this to preclude forensic testing. Eric said no, that's a normal habit. And I thought it made sense because he was going to see Allison, hence he wanted to be clean shaven, anticipating sex. The state asked if he was innocent. Why did he run? He says he didn't. He argued that he wanted to avoid this confrontation at the airport face-to-face with the police. He wasn't under arrest. He was free to go anywhere he wanted at any time. But he could have simply avoided that by returning to Chicago and invoking his Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. Instead, he decides it would be better to lie to the police. The law says that evidence of flight by itself is not sufficient evidence to establish guilt, but it is a piece of evidence that you can take into account to infer the consciousness of guilt. The last thing Eric argued was that the state's evidence of his motive was speculative. According to Eric, he had worked things out with Terry. Terry agreed to get a loan to cover the credit card debt that Eric fraudulently incurred so that they could save their credit from declining. Terry was busy and he kept putting it off while Mary's credit was dropping. Eric then took it upon himself to fraudulently obtain the loan using Terry's identity. Terry was going to do it anyway. He just figured, I'm going to get the ball rolling faster. But the jury was supposed to believe that despite this breach of trust, Terry supposedly agreed to yet another loan, which Eric had also obtained fraudulently when Terry once again procrastinated. And this was secured the day of the murders, and that's not suspicious. It was argued that anyone that's rational could find Eric's testimony was completely self-serving. And it was also inconsistent to what his sisters and what Eric himself said, that his dad would flip out if he found out. We're coming to the end of this video, and this was really important for me to look at, so I want to share it with you. I want to be able to break this down and think like a juror. For the jury to have found Eric not guilty, this is what they would have had to believe. Are you ready? That the GPS unit in the defendant's car deactivated itself, or some unknown person deactivated it fortuitously on the evening of the murders. 2, that an unknown person made peaceable entry into the Sal's home and bludgeoned Kate and Jimmy. 3, that an unknown person made peaceable entry into the Hansons' home while Eric slept, and A, shot Mary and Terry in the master bedroom, B, turned on all the lights in the house, including in Eric's bedroom, C, retrieved plastic tarps from the garage and wrapped Mary and Terry's body in them, D, moved the Hansons' vehicles and transported the bodies to the Sal's residence, E, cleaned the Hansons' home, including Eric's bedroom, F, moved furniture, switched mattresses, and made the beds, and G, drilled holes in the parents' headboard and wall, and then filled them. 4, that an unknown person re-entered the Hansons' home on September 29th after Eric left and A, burned items in the fireplace, B, burned scented candles to disguise the odors of gunpowder, blood, and cleaning agents. 5, that an unknown person put bloody gloves containing Mary and Terry's DNA into a plastic bag from the Hansons' kitchen and then placed that bag in Eric's car. 6, that someone besides Eric was a common link between the Hansons and the Sal's household. And 7, that an unknown person staged the Sal's residence to make it appear that the murders had all occurred there in order to deflect any suspicion from Eric. What do you think? If you were on the jury, what would you be thinking? This case is so complicated and complex to me and very interesting because it was still a fact that there were no shoe prints, fingerprints, hair, saliva, blood, or even trace evidence like a fiber from anything of Eric's at the Sal's crime scene. In closing arguments, the defense argued Eric could not have killed 4 people and cleared the homes of evidence by himself or in time to leave the next morning. I'm still stuck on the car situation. Did he walk back to his parents' house after leaving Terry's car there to throw off the search? Because I'm thinking the 3 cars were parked outside of the Hansons' residence. The one neighbor saw all 3 cars. Why would they be pulled out of the garage and put on the street? Maybe it was because, I love thinking these through, maybe it was because initially Mary's SUV was like it was, parked beside the motorcycle in the garage, and then Terry and Eric were parked outside, blocking the garage door from Mary's SUV being able to come out. Therefore, Eric takes both the cars, parks those on the street, maybe pulls out the SUV and turns it around and faces it into the garage with the back facing a better position for him to get the bodies into the vehicle. Then he drives the SUV from the Hansons to the Sal's residence. I don't know how he unloaded everything there, but it is a 3-car garage now that I'm thinking of it. Because there's a 2-car garage and they said there was a Lexus and a Mercedes. So I don't know about that 3rd garage area. If he was able to use the missing, remember the missing garage door opener? If he was able to use that and then pull in to that garage. I didn't think of that. But let's just say he didn't and he was just outside. They say that the reason that Terry's body was between the Mercedes and the Lexus, which kind of means he didn't go through the other side, so let's just scrap that, was because he couldn't carry him any further. Like he was tired by this point. So he pulls the SUV backwards up to the garage door, opens the garage door with the, garage door opener, and pulls his parents out of the vehicle into the house with no one seeing him. After he does that, he gets back in his mom's SUV. He leaves the scene, pulls his mom's car back into the Hansons' garage where it was before, and then drives Terry's Impala. I don't know why, because that would be obvious. Like, why didn't you just leave it at home? Doesn't make any sense to me. If you wanted to throw them off, why would you put, I don't know. But he drove the Impala back to the Sal's, and then he would have to have walked back. How long would that have taken him? Because I love doing the math. I'm not good at math, but I like doing the math. Okay, I just paused and I looked it up. It would take him an hour and 30 minutes to walk from the Sal's residence back to the Hansons. So, If you include all of the driving time from before, and I'm just going to say it's 40 because when I did the math, it said 12 minutes. So if you're taking all of this into account, that's like 2 hours of just travel time. 2 hours. And we don't know when his parents fell asleep. Oh, I'm not saying he didn't do it. I'm just kind of perplexed on how he was able to pull it off. This was his first time killing people. This was his first crime scene. Maybe some people are just way better at that than others. That's creepy. But that's 2 hours of just getting from place to place. Not to mention, like I said, we don't know when his parents fell asleep. He saw his dad at 11:30. Did they fall asleep at midnight? Did they fall asleep at 1:30? When did they fall asleep? By 2 o'clock, all the lights were on in the house. Let's not forget. So I would assume it had to have happened before 2. And since he mentioned the time 1:30, that always means to me that there's some kind of significance to that. So I'm going to assume it happened at 1:30. And that's why all the lights were on by 2, when the neighbor took out her dog. So it's 2 o'clock. But also, can we just stop and think about the fact that he was at Christine's at 10:15 and he somehow got over to the Sal's residence and was able to kill Jimmy by 10:43? Didn't they say it takes 20 minutes for him to get there? That left like 3 minutes for him to kill him. I'm telling you, the numbers are off. The numbers are definitely off. That's a lot to do in such a little amount of time. So I do not think the bodies were in the home when he was cleaning. I'm pretty sure he would have gone and gotten rid of them first and then come back and done all the cleaning. So let's say he was home by 3 o'clock to do everything. That only gives him like 3.5 hours. Unless he never got on the road. He never got on the road like he said he did. So really, he left around like 9:30 in the morning. So that gives him about 5 or 6 hours. I think that would be enough time. What do you think? What are your conclusions? Eric chose to testify, and he did so for 5 whole hours. He admitted to lying to his family, using the credit cards and the money that wasn't his, but he said he already admitted that. He had no motive to kill them. He was already planning to pay them back, and he had already started paying them back. He just had really bad impulse control, and he kept falling back into stealing, but he did not kill anyone. The prosecution argued the motive was simple: greed, jealousy, and trying to keep up his fake lifestyle. Once it began to unravel, the only way out was to get rid of everyone, which got him closer to inheriting more money that wasn't his. A jury of 8 men and 4 women only deliberated for 3 hours Wednesday, February 20th, before finding Eric guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder, as well as a bunch of other charges, but I won't go into all of those. Eric just sat there with no expression on his face as Judge Robert Anderson announced the verdict. On Thursday, February 21st, the same jury began the process of going through the penalty phase. This would determine whether Eric would spend the rest of his life in prison or be sentenced to death. Jennifer said Eric should not be put to death, but she did cry tears of relief and hug the prosecutors and family and friends outside the courthouse after the guilty verdict. During the penalty phase, defense attorneys called Dr. Marva Dawkins. She's a clinical psychologist who testified that Eric was suffering from narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial and dependency features. She also tried to emphasize the fact that he was diagnosed with ADHD at 18 months old, and he had been on several different medications when he was growing up. I know we kind of touched on that. I don't know what your thoughts and opinions are. I would love to hear them below. She said that all of these conditions started when he was just a child, and they've continued throughout his adulthood. She spent a lot of time interviewing him in jail, and she reviewed hundreds of pieces of evidence. I don't really understand her conclusion fully, but she concluded Eric had an unpredictable relationship with his parents, and although he seems macho, he's actually very sensitive, weak, and vulnerable. I wasn't sure if she was arguing that these things had to do with him committing the crime or that he didn't commit the crime. I don't know. State Attorney Berlin argued that the impact of something like ADHD on these murders was so low, very low. He even said Bill Gates and several US presidents have had ADHD and that they didn't kill anyone. Another statement he made, which I'm not sure I 100% agree with, but you can tell me what you think. He said that even if he had a personality disorder, it didn't make him commit the murders. What do you think about that? On February 28th, 2008, the jury sentenced Eric to death. They only deliberated for 90 minutes. However, in 2011, The Illinois General Assembly abolished the death penalty. Eric's death sentence was commuted by Democratic Governor Pat Quinn. He said it was the most difficult decision he ever had to make as a governor. He said that if you decide to abolish the death penalty, you have to do it for everyone. He tried to offer some kind words to victims' families. So he said that the family of Illinois was with them, but he understood that they'll never heal from what happened to them. Prosecutors and some victims' families urged Quinn not to abolish the death penalty. But despite this, he went forward and 15 sentences were commuted, including Eric's. It's true that Eric may not have been able to afford much outside of jail, but in the end, he was able to buy himself time here on Earth. Thank you all so very much for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the notifications bell so you don't miss another one of my videos. I will see you in my next one. Bye.